So the questions that we're going to be talking about are the topics actually chosen by the global community who connected their Web3 wallet to an app, and they're actually paying to have these questions answered by our two experts here. And so yeah, thank you for the global community for funding this discourse, and it's kind of a cool concept. So I'll just introduce myself, and then I'll introduce the topic. Then the speakers will introduce themselves. So I'm Prav, I go by Captain Bitcoin Online. So the topic tonight is Appchains and the future of Web3. So we're going to be talking about how to assess how Appchains are contributing to the broader Web3 ecosystem. So the first thing we'll do is have the speakers introduce themselves. So ladies first.
Sure. Right. He's referring to me, right? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
We both have long hair.
We do. Right. Thank you. I'm Sastrowardoyo. I go by Decentralized online. That's actually a recent name. I had another name previously. I used to work for IBM when I discovered Bitcoin in 2013, and that was back when IBM wasn't doing anything for blockchain, wasn't doing like that, like their fabric stuff. I was basically working for IBM Lab Services until like 2015 to 2016. I was pushing, because this is the lab services of IBM, was pushing them to do a lot more with crypto, a lot more with blockchain. I managed to do it, but someone else managed to do it. Hyperledger Fabric came from it, but I didn't agree with the way they did Hyperledger Fabric, because first of all, obviously it's too centralized. It's blockchain name only, there's no tokenization. They were trying to push it to every single bank or like insurance company that got caught up in the hype. And I thought that was super dangerous. So I left IBM in 2017, went full-time crypto, built my first blockchain company, Blockchain Zoo. So I don't know if it's still around actively, but I think the domain is still around. I think they're still like releasing videos and whatnot. Blockchain Zoo. One of the first crypto consulting companies that was listed in Gartner. If you guys know Gartner, it's the listing for IT companies. It's like the Fortune 500 of IT. So we were there together with Consensus, the first 20 blockchain consulting companies, and some a few other projects. After the thing I'm most proud of is basically setting up. I made crypto legal. Me and my friends with the Indonesian Blockchain Association, we made cryptocurrency, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies legal in Indonesia. So that's back in 2018.
As property.
As property, yeah, as commodities. So the sort of the loophole that we thought while Indonesia does not allow payment in anything other than their own fiat, it's encoded into the constitution. It is allowed to have commodities. So, of course, making crypto an asset class basically became sort of like a go-to regulatory framework for Asia. So a lot of Asian nations basically now consider cryptocurrencies not as legal tenders, but as basically commodities. That stemmed from Indonesia and stemmed from the work we did there back in 2018. Then I did a few, like during that cycle, I did a lot of consulting projects with like government entities, including First Chain, the CBDC of Indonesia, that ended up basically going back to from the dark side, going back to the Jedi side. We started a few companies during this cycle, and that includes the Bio Network, which tries to decentralize your, basically, if you've ever had like 23andMe personal genetic testing, they own your data and they sell your data. A certain drug company, which I will not mention, owns 33% of the entirety of 23andMe. And they use you for pharmacogenetic material. They use you basically, and that's actually not playing back to you. This is $1 billion industry that uses you for your genetic material, and you are not getting a cent out of it. We're trying to decentralize that. Yep, thank you. Thanks for the book. Thank you. Yeah. Trying to decentralize that. It's called Bio Network. Bio Network. It's a play on DeFi. Instead of DeFi, it's Bio.network. We're also creating a free speech social network called Myriad.social. It's Myriad another way to be decentralized. In fact, that's actually one of the things that we're going to be discussing today. Yeah, those are the two things. I'm here in Miami until January 2nd, unfortunately. I mean, I'm only here briefly. But Miami's been awesome, and you guys have been awesome. So here you go, Sheldon. Go ahead.
Great, thank you for.
So it's a very set way to do this. So the questions that we're going to be talking about are the topics actually chosen by the global community who connected their Web3 wallet to an app, and they're actually paying to have these questions answered by our two experts here. And so yeah, thank you for the global community for funding this discourse, and it's kind of a cool concept. So I'll just introduce myself, and then I'll introduce the topic. Then the speakers will introduce themselves. So I'm Prav. I go by Captain Bitcoin Online. So the topic tonight is Appchains and the future of Web3. So we're going to be talking about how to assess how Appchains are contributing to the broader Web3 ecosystem. So the first thing we'll do is have the speakers introduce themselves. So ladies first.
Sure. Right. He's referring to me, right? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
We both have long hair.
We do. Right. Pandu. I'm Sastrowardoyo. I go by Decentralized online. That's actually a recent name. I had another name previously. I used to work for IBM when I discovered Bitcoin in 2013, and that was back when IBM wasn't doing anything for blockchain, wasn't doing like that related fabric stuff. I was basically working for IBM Lab Services until like 2015, 2016. I was pushing, because this is the lab services of IBM, was pushing them to do a lot more with crypto, a lot more with blockchain. I managed to do it, but someone else managed to do it. Hyperledger Fabric came from it, but I didn't agree with the way they did Hyperledger Fabric, because first of all, obviously it's too centralized. It's blockchain name only, there's no tokenization. They were trying to push it to every single bank or like insurance company that got caught up in the hype. And I thought that was super dangerous. So I left IBM in 2017, went full-time crypto, built my first blockchain company, Blockchain Zoo. So I don't know if it's still around actively, but I think the domain's still around. I think they're still like releasing videos and whatnot. Blockchain Zoo. One of the first crypto consulting companies that was listed in Gartner. If you guys know Gartner, it's the listing for IT companies. It's like the Fortune 500 of IT. So we were there together with Consensus, the first 20 blockchain consulting companies, and started a few other projects. After, the thing I'm most proud of is basically setting up. I made crypto legal. Me and my friends with the Indonesian Blockchain Association, we made cryptocurrency, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies legal in Indonesia. So that's back in 2018.
As property.
As property, yeah, as commodities. So the sort of the loophole that we found was, while Indonesia does not allow payment in anything other than their own fiat, it's encoded into the constitution, it is allowed to have commodities. So, of course, making crypto an asset class basically became sort of like a go-to regulatory framework for Asia. So a lot of Asian nations basically now which is from the Web3 perspective, crypto, and from the federated perspective, which is another way to be decentralized. In fact, that's actually one of the things that I'm going to be discussing today. Yeah, those are the two things. I'm here in Miami until January 2nd, unfortunately. I mean, I'm only here briefly, but Miami's been awesome, and you guys have been awesome. So here you go, Sheldon. Go ahead.
Wait, thank you for Miami. Sheldon.
And with that, I'll just start by saying I'm from Kendall. I'm just some guy. But I'm from Kendall, and I'm based here, and very happy to see I'm going to do a bunch of things, but my background is actually music, if you go back to my college days, but starting in 2012 I was working for the Fortune 500 doing a bunch of different things with networks, network security, reverse engineering, a bunch of different things. And between my time working at the Fortune 500, I always knew that I was working for the man. I always knew that I was working for entities that I would not be willing to stick with long term. But I spent some time and got to learn a lot from people much more experienced than myself. And in 2021, I turned it into a part-time role with Octopus Network, which I'm very proud to have secured. I spent a year or so with them and change, and I'm very happy about that because that's pretty rare in the crypto market itself. But my skill set doesn't come from music, it comes from that experience, reverse engineering, and working in IT in the Fortune 500, mostly as a network engineer. And I've brought that expertise to the blockchain space because that's the only place that is worth trying to do something new. When you try to tell a corporation, hey, XYZ, no, they have to be pulled from the outside by people like us. So, happy to have conversations about this stuff. I'll save a much longer intro for me for another time because I'll be around, I'll be here.
Yeah, definitely. So, and thanks again for sponsoring. So before we actually go into the discourse, let's define some terms. So the topic of this discourse is Appchains in the future of Web3. So we'll assume that the people online who voted for the questions tonight already know what Web3 is because they literally connected their crypto wallet to ask these questions. So we'll keep that aside. We'll give that as a given. So first question is, define what an Appchain is and also how you are involved in that ecosystem. So Sheldon, why don't you start first and then Pandu.
Sheldon can start first.
Sure, so I think the definition of a tap chain or an app chain is a single application that uses some sort of distribution process, you could argue decentralized process. These are frequently distilled to, nothingness, right? They're buzzwords. So I think that an application that lives in multiple places such that it doesn't have a single point of failure is an adequate app chain. If you have an app chain and you have one RPC interface, it's not very healthy. There's only one place where messages are coming in and out of that blockchain to actually do stuff. So an application that has no single points of failure, maybe reliant on external sources or not, I think that's the rightful definition of a dApp chain or an app chain is that it's an application that can't be killed by, say, shutting down 30% of its operators.
So you use the term Appchain and dApp chain almost interchangeably. Are they the same term or what is that?
I think so. The term Appchain or dApp chain has not been really, I would say, coined. I'd say some people would say that it's been coined, including my CEO. I think that as a concept, it's still not understood. So even though, Web3 was lauded as a concept in '93 or whatever it was, this is roughly the same kind of thing where it's a phrase that hasn't been sort of burned into the wider audience based on a popular implementation of an app chain, right? You could argue that Bitcoin is one. That's a long and a strange argument. But as an application and not an infrastructure, this does not describe most layer 1 does not describe most blockchains today.
Thank you. And then same for Pandu, if you could define Appchain and your role in that ecosystem.
Sure. I'm actually going to answer both by giving you my experience. I set up the first two Appchains of the Octopus network, which actually works and worth it. The reason we did that was, so originally we started with Dearr. We started the proof of concept of both of these, the bioinformatics blockchain as well as the free speech social media. We started those in
that actually voted and paid the questions on the app. So the first question is, what are some examples of prominent Appchains?
So literally
The Myriad Appchain in Octopus network is the largest one. It has the largest user base. I think the most popular Appchain that people have heard of before is probably DYDX. DYDX was trying to be a really, feature-rich, decentralized exchange, and they realized that they needed their own chain to be able to do that. I think that there's probably a handful of others that could be mentioned, but that's top of the list.
And I think you already mentioned it as well.
I did.
So
That's good.
the first real question is, what new consensus mechanisms do Appchains make possible? So I think if you can answer this question in the context that I think the people online have asked it, is these are people who literally connected a Web3 wallet to ask these questions online. So so if you can answer, what are the consensus mechanisms that Appchains make possible that weren't possible before Appchains were introduced?
what consensus mechanisms do Appchains?
I think one of them that we tend to not acknowledge, which is part of the reason why I let my high-level definition be high-level, is social consensus models. BluntDAO is a local project that I'm very proud of. BluntDAO showed up a bunch of different spaces in Miami and took a bunch of people by surprise. But consensus models based on proofs don't always have to be computational proofs. I think that proofs that are systemic and reasonable to other people, that is reasonable as a social structure, I think that doesn't have to be a blockchain, but it still translates to the same concept of an Appchain, where there's not one person who could die and then BluntDAO would go away. There's a lot of different validators for BluntDAO in Miami, and I think they would agree with me, at least in principle, that the model of social consensus is just a bunch of people agreeing to do something.
So can you give a specific example of how
Can you give a specific example of actually how BluntDAO works? I think some people might not know what it is.
Sure, so BluntDAO is a local concept based on validating individuals who have participated in a session. You have to actually smoke a blunt with somebody in BluntDAO to get into BluntDAO. I don't smoke blunts. I did once. I did one time, and passing around all my other glass and other surreptitious. That wasn't me. That's a different mode. But the point I'm trying to make is that BluntDAO's uniquity or unique functionality is to operate as a community. That doesn't mean making a consensus that can validate something necessarily, but it is consensus for a specialized topic. So every one of those people who is part of that weed smoking experience, they've shared certain ideas. They share certain ideals about cannabis legalization, and that is acting as a base for that social proof.
Right, just to add to that, when we're talking about consensus models, the things that are enabled with these new types of consensus, and going back to the actual definition of consensus, it's like an agreement. And the way we do design DAOs these days, design the governance of these Appchains are very. We try to sort of go back to see whether it makes sense or not. If it's true POS and everyone basically it's one token, one vote, does that actually centralize things again? Because here's the thing, when we're talking about IT, the drive is always towards centralization of power, right? And this is not just IT, this is economics as well. It's pure. The purity of economics actually creates more centralization than less. And that's how when we're talking about consensus models, we need to sort of go back to whether should it be sold on tokens instead of having something that's one token, one vote. Should it be per identity? How do you avoid Sybil attacks in that sense? You avoid Sybil attacks by KYCing everybody, which is a terrible fucking idea, but how do you do it? I think this raises sort of something that I really want to talk about. I don't know if we can talk about it now, but whether the current way we're doing blockchains are wrong, are not decentralized, or are currently decentralized but are headed towards centralization. And this is one element of it that I need to bring up.
Sure, yeah, we can launch into that topic. So the third question from the voting is, what does the future of Appchains look like? So from that point of view, feel free to talk about the problems with the current consensus mechanism and perhaps how they can be fixed in the future.
Yeah, actually, Appchains, I think, are still the best way to create like full-stack blockchains like this that are optimized for a certain use case, for a certain multiple use cases and business processes, obviously. But there are things in the governance mechanism that are still centralized, and this is not this Octopus network. This is actually anything that's multi-chain and anything that actually has like AHM on the bottom. The thing that is being relayed here is not just data. It is not even just assets. There's also trust, right? Like how do you? We're basically relinquishing trust by relinquishing security to these infrastructures. But like that's a necessity. There's a necessity for that. But we need to deploy things quickly. We're actually in the startup space right now. Like we're crypto people, but we're also startups people. Like we all have like our project logos somewhere on our bodies. But like we also need to find out how. So of course, as startup people, we need to launch quickly. We can't wait for years for miners or validators to start from scratch. That's untenable for us, like for our investors also. So I do not have a solution like how the future is going to look like, but I don't think it will look like this. The reason is, I think, honestly, crypto is not the ultimate in decentralization. The ultimate, the highest level of decentralization, in my opinion, is user sovereign decentralization, where you actually run your own websites, you run your own chats, and you basically interact with everyone using your own systems, your own computers, your own servers. HTTP used to be like that. FTP used to be like that. IRC used to be like that. It changed. The reason it changed is not because the protocol itself changed, not because the technology itself changed. It was because of centralization of power. URLs became super duper powerful. Facebook.com is a lot more valuable than my website. And
Let's pick up this one. Yeah. So
Sheldon, if you could comment on what Pandu just mentioned, especially the decentralization versus decentralization, and then also your comment, your take on the future of Appchains as well.
You had me at trust. I'll say that because that's definitely the extension that we should be talking about is the way that we don't want single actors to be responsible for our assets, responsible for our livelihood, personal data, bioinformatic data. You know, I think that trust is really central point to the conversation because we are going to see that differently over the next few years. To Pandu's closing points, I think that standardization of the way that we interact is the main thing. Specialization in what we do is the sort of, let's say, bimodal alternative to that, right? They go together, they're synergistic. So the idea that we're all going to be doing things in silos doesn't make sense. But to suggest that there is a forest of silos where we all know how to communicate with each other, that's the future of Appchains that I'm looking for. I'm very fond of IBC as a standard for doing that because I'm used to working with VPNs, and it's a little bit of a similar handshaking process. And okay, we're good. Okay, we're good. We can talk. But yeah.
So Pandu, from how does that relate to your final your latest comment about centralization in Facebook?
Alright. I think there's always been a cycle of decentralization, centralization, even like way back to like the early days of like fucking IBM where I used to work. Personal computers, mainframes, right? And then like smaller personal computers, and like what were they? Not smaller mainframes.
The workstation concept, even just that.
Yeah, even that. Like, honestly, the thing about these things, right? Like everyone likes capital. Obviously, everyone likes injections of capital. But the way this is framed, like as the language, for example, building blockchains by creating network effects and ensuring that your blockchain or your dApp has enough network effects to survive.